Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Shane Plays White Plume Mountain Notes series as I DM my intrepid party of players through White Plume Mountain from Tales from the Yawning Portal, which updates 7 classic adventures into 5th edition. We've been having a great time with it. If you're new to this series, I basically just kind of give a recap of what happened of each session, give my notes on DMing and my thoughts and tips, and maybe go into some D&D rules and that sort of thing. So thanks for watching. I hope you like what you see, and subscribe and keep watching. If you're a returning viewer, thanks so much. Really appreciate you for coming along for the ride and all your comments and engagement and all that cool stuff. So with no further ado, let's get right into it. We'll do some viewer feedback, and then we'll go over what happened in the most recent session. The previous session, as you'll remember, the party encountered the vampire and got its booty kicked. They've been OPing stuff for a long time. They ran in the vampire and just got brought up short. 3 characters died, and 1 player decided to change characters. So it was a momentous session, to say the least. They had kind of not been taking the dungeon completely seriously, uh, as viewers were even pointing out, and perhaps they'll take it more seriously. But we'll talk about that in a session if anything has changed in their sort of outlook. But I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and let's take a look at what we have here. So, okay, so last video was 10. Nathan Kelly said, wow, and he's talking about the little video clip I put in there, a free RPG day at Game Goblins in Little Rock, an event I helped promote. He said, wow, nerds look the same no matter where you go. Busy game store there, kind of loud though. Well, yeah, it was loud that day because we packed a lot of people in. Any game store, friendly local game store, is not usually going to be that loud on any given day, but we had the tables packed. Throughout the day, we had something like 14 games. So you can't get that many nerds together playing D&D without a little bit of noise. Now, as far as nerds look the same, nerds, geeks, whatever, yeah, we are a tribe. So there is that. All right, the Michael Metcalf said, wow, 3 PC deaths in 1 session. Satinmir, blowing back player character since 1979. Satinmir is the name of the vampire, who by lore in the Dungeon Master's Guide for the entry for Whelm could be a dwarf vampire, although I didn't run it that way because the adventure doesn't specifically, say that, so I didn't even know about that till it was pointed out to me. Sounds like it was a great session with good combat and good role playing. It's awesome when a player gives up her life for the rest of the party. Uzumaki, the fighter from basically the Orient of the Forgotten Realms, sacrificed themselves so the party could run. They threw Black Razor down the corridor and said run, and ran inside the door and closed the door. Sacrificed their life to fight the vampire. All right, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the many. Okay. Do you think the players will meet their old allies as vampire spawns if they go back to claim Whelm? Shane, with a little wink. I ain't saying. That's almost. I ain't saying. On the off chance, because that one of my players is watching this video series. So, but that would certainly be a nice twist, a nice addition to the game. P.S. Crazy about the magic missile ruling. I've seen DMs do it, but I never knew it was the official rule. I've never even seen DMs or play. I've never seen anybody do it. I was talking about last video, the ruling from Jeremy Crawford, who basically was the lead of the player's handbook, that said when you cast magic missile, you just roll 1 die, 1d4, and then multiply that result by the amount of missiles that you cast. Whereas most people just roll a bunch of d4s, 1 for each missile, and add it all up. 1d4 plus 1, whatever. So yeah, there's big people like, what? So I don't know. Again, I told my players they could do it either way. But you would think Jeremy Crawford would know. But he did say in the tweet that started the whole thing, he said rules as written, do it, just roll once. Rules as interpreted, do it, do whatever you want. So he did say that. Okay. Thanks so much, Michael and Nathan, for your comments. Got a couple more here. One, Sonic Halo said, well, a daylight spell might not have killed the vampire, but would have dispelled that darkness in the room, as in the entry in Yawning Portal, it just says darkness spell. So I assume is technically 2nd level, just permanent. And a daylight spell banishes darkness at 3rd level cast and below. The darkness would just come back at dawn. Okay, so what are you talking about? the lair of the vampire has darkness cast in it. It's a 30 by 30 room, and this really caused a lot of problems for the players. Now, here's the thing, because a couple of people mentioned this: the players did not have daylight or any spell that could dispel. They had like your basic light spell, I think, and dancing lights. And actually during the encounter, they looked all and said, well, we can't do anything about this darkness. So it wasn't that they didn't know that a daylight spell wouldn't do that. They didn't have it ready. That nobody could cast it was the issue. All right. Also the fireballs, and he's talking again how I did this sort of what did I call it? Vampire battleship, where I drew out a grid and I had marked where stuff was, and the characters were telling, the players were saying, well, I'm casting this or that, or telling me where they were, and I was kind of, I knew where things were, and they had no clue, and at certain points they were casting fireballs. Um, it said the fireballs with a 20-foot radius, 40-foot diameter could hit the entire room if it's cast in the center few squares. That's true, but they didn't do that, Sonic Halo. The ranges they specifically gave me had it basically hitting the back wall. So, but you're right. Technically, if they would have cast a certain way, the fireball could have hit the whole room and hurt the vampire. But the way they were specifically telling me, it didn't go that way. So I am curious, and if they go back straight after Whelm again, if you will ambush them on the way out with the Ifrit or the Afridi, like it is written in the adventure, because if they do wave last, there probably won't be an opportunity for that, considering that wave protects them from the boiling lake, and most groups, unless careful, get shot out through the geyser. So enjoying the series still. Haven't commented on the last several episodes because most of your rulings have been solid and there wasn't much to say, it seemed. All right, well, thanks, Sonic. Sonic Halo. So again, on the fireballs, just the way they told me they were casting them, none of the, I said, well, how far? And they would always say, maximum distance or as far back as it'll go. Or so, they weren't hitting the center of the room for that to happen. Now, being ambushed on the way out with the Afridi, there are a couple of Afridi that will ambush them on the way out after Caraptus or whoever is running the dungeon, the voice booms and yells stuff. But by the book, it says if they're leaving for good. So it's not just do they have two of the weapons, it's are they leaving, are they leaving for good and not coming back? If that's the case, then you kick off that encounter. And then, so whether they have all three or whether they have, it does say if they have two or three. So if they just have one weapon and they're leaving for good, technically this doesn't kick off. But if they have two or three of the weapons, Black Razor, which they have, Whelm, which they're going for, and then Wave, which is the trident that you mentioned, then you can kick off that encounter. And the point is that whoever's running the dungeon, originally Caraptus, and it may be Caraptus in this case, or it may be not, something's running the dungeon, is really kind of using the dungeon as a test. And if they do well enough, he wants to bring them, or she or it or whatever it is wants to bring the party members to the indoctrination center, which is never described in the adventure. If you go that route, you have to come up with what that means. So now the White Plume Mountain novel by Paul Kidd, which I've mentioned before, he had it that I think they were trying to use the successful adventurers were deemed powerful, and they were trying to drain their essence to, I think, resurrect Caraptus, if I remember right. So that was what happened. Now, this is just meant to be one final encounter. I may or may not go that way in my game because I have a couple of one or two final encounters in my head already. I think I'm thinking about doing. But I may go this route too, just as one final, you got to earn those weapons kind of thing. And what Sonic Halo is talking about, Wave protects them from the boiling lake of most groups unless careful get shot out through the geyser. In the well or the Wave encounter with the trident, it's very easy for a lake of boiling hot fatal water and to just in on you. And if you have Wave under a certain condition, it will create a cube of force that will protect you from everything. and the current and the forces of the lake and all that will push you into the geyser that blows out the top of the mountain. We'll discuss that more in depth, when the players get there, assuming they get there. So, okay, so I just responded. Let's see if there's anything. Yeah, my response I've already pretty much covered just now what I had typed back out to Sonic Halo. So Sonic Halo, thanks for your comments. Rob Plummer said, great video, Shane. First, I've always played magic missiles. You rolls for damage on each die, not just one die. That's what pretty much everybody does. I wonder if there's some confusion on Jeremy's part. I mean, why after all these years would they change that simple mechanic? That's what everybody's curious about. I don't know of anyone that plays it where you roll one damage die for all the missiles. Has anyone watched any of the videos from Wizards of the Coast to see if anyone does a magic missile and how it is played? That's a great point. I haven't. But that's a great point. Secondly, I'm glad you finally gave the party a real challenge. They need it. That's part of the game. I love when the game has you on the edge of your seat. A question about the darkness. Could someone have cast a higher level light spell to counteract or dispel magic of the higher level? That may have gotten rid of the darkness. Great job as always, Shane. All right, so thanks, Rob. Again, yeah, if they would have had that prepared, they could have cast that. They could have gotten rid of it. They just, again, didn't have it. That's the thing. When you're always preparing for combat, and you fall into a rut, a lot of those other spells are like, oh, this is just taking up a spell slot. But it can be the difference between making or breaking an encounter. So, definitely. And in this case, like Dispel Magic or Daylight or something like that could have made a huge difference. So, okay, Cody Lloyd said, hey Shane, great recap. I know you don't root for the monster as a DM, and I'm glad the party learned its lesson. There's people that, as I said, they're, wanting, this party has been OPing stuff, which is fine, but they've also been kind of almost playing around with the dungeon, which, definitely goes against the spirit of the daunting challenge of the dungeon. So anyway, also want to say thanks for showing a little video of Free RPG Day. I was in it, so Cody Lloyd was in that video from Game Goblins. I don't want you to keep coming back to this conversation since it's not relevant to the video, but it has to do with using spells, cantrips to avoid danger. Would you consider Mage Hand to be one of those? After listening to the viewer feedback, I feel like I may be taking advantage of this cantrip as a warlock in the campaign I am. I think what Cody's talking about is, I said that, if people are constantly using their familiars to basically, negate any and all danger of suspense of the dungeon or the adventure or whatever, then I don't shed a tear when that familiar bites the dust. So, but yeah, if somebody's using a cantrip over and over and over and over, and just completely spoiling the spirit of the adventure, the suspense, the surprises, whatever, then there'd probably be ways to counteract that. As a DM, I would probably start altering encounters so the cantrip either would not be effective or would backfire, just to, kind of help encourage the player not to always rely on it. Now, as far as if it's a problem with you're doing it, Cody, like I said, in my response, I said, as for a Mage Hand, it really comes down to your DM. If it's becoming an issue, they will likely tinker with things behind the scenes to balance things out. Hopefully, they'll either do that or point it out if it's a problem. I said, regardless, it's a fair spell, so I would use it. I don't, and again, I don't restrict familiars. I just don't feel bad when they take a dirt nap, and have adjusted scenarios on occasion to minimize their impact. So, a lot of it's just down to you and your DM. And for you personally as a player, is it boring to just use Mage Hand over and over and over and over as a basically a 10-foot pole, just to constantly be, is that interesting? Is that fun for you? Is it fun for the party? So just kind of balance all that stuff. There's no one singular yes/no answer on this. But if you're thinking maybe I'm taking a little bit of advantage of this, maybe I don't know. Again, it's situational. And the main thing is if the DM's fine with it and you're fine with it and everybody's having fun, go for it. It's really what it comes down to. And yeah, sorry, man. Sorry I didn't recognize you. There were a lot of people at Free RPG Day, so sorry I didn't say hi. There were a ton of people there. Okay, and I'm glad you came out and had fun doing it. I had fun promoting it. Okay, so Ethan D said, if the characters who decided to stay back hadn't done so, would you have had the vampire pursue them to the turnstile? I wonder if more characters might have died in that case. Either way, I love that your players made a choice and committed to it, even though you made it clear there was no turning back for them. It's definitely speaking of the gnome wizard who said, I want to stay back and help. And I said, if you do, you're not going to survive. I said, we're not even going to roll dice. We'll just narrate that you don't survive. And they were like, I'm okay with that. So I think that's what Ethan's talking about. Now here again with Ethan, it said, now here's my question about the future of their dungeon delve. If they decide to go back for the vampire, instead of tackling the middle path to get to Wave, are you at all considering having them run into one or more of the fallen parties as vampire spawn? That's the second time that question's come up. Again, interesting. I'm not going to say for sure if I'm going to do that or not, but I will say one of their fallen members does reappear. And I'll just leave it at that. So I'll do that in the session recap. I can't remember if there are more conditions to it, but I think that any humanoid that dies to the vampire's bite can come back as a vampire spawn. I'd have to check on that, though, and this is what Ethan's saying. Okay, obviously putting any vampire spawn in the room with the vampire himself would just make the difficult encounter near impossible. So I wouldn't recommend that at all. I wouldn't either, to be honest, because they're having a hard enough time with the vampire. But it could be a fun, dark reminder for the characters that survived if you used it as an encounter before they get back to the vampire himself. It would also add something new to the dungeon they've already seen, so it's not just the same as it was before. All good points. So we'll see. I'm kind of playing that one close to the vest. If I don't use them as vampire spawn or something along those lines, it will probably be for time, because I don't want to spend too much time in White Plume Mountain, and we've already been in here longer than I planned for. Which is fine though, everyone's having fun. But I do want to get back to Out of the Abyss Part 2. But all these things are pointing out about the vampire spawn and everything are great points. So what I said if the wizard hadn't stayed behind, there's a good chance the vampire would have pursued them at least part of the way. Yeah, the wizard staying behind and sacrificing herself definitely kept the vampire from chasing the party through the discs, hanging on the chains over the boiling hot mud that's killer, and then the turnstile and all that. But yeah, the vampire would have at least harassed or chased them some or part of the way, or part or all of the way. The thing was, it worked out perfect because we were running out of time. We were almost done with the session, and the player decided to sacrifice themselves. Just solved a lot of issues for me. Otherwise, we would have had to say, okay, end on yet another cliffhanger in the middle of the battle, and we'll play all that out next time. That would have been 3 full sessions basically fighting the vampire, or at least 2.5, because they encountered the vampire, started fighting it, then they had a cliffhanger, then they had another full session, and at the end of that session 3 party members died. If that party member hadn't sacrificed themselves, then we'd have probably had yet another full session after that, or close to it, getting away from the vampire. So I'm glad it worked out the way it did. And then finally, well, no, we got 2 more comments here. Mike McCarthy said, hey Shane, great uploads. I've really enjoyed them and benefited from the content. Thanks, Mike. I love that feedback. It really seems like this video series is helping people, so I'm really glad about that. Let's see here. I have a question about the vampire encounter because my players are currently standing outside of its room. As you have described it, it strikes me as unbeatable. Could you give us a few scenarios or tactics that you think give the players a fighting chance? If not, should the room be modified a bit for us DMs that want to give our players a little better odds? Cheers, Mike. Okay, so here's my thoughts on it. It's not unbeatable per se, but at a minimum, I think they need to dispel the darkness in the room, or else just don't go in there, and don't get pulled in there if possible. Radiant damage also prevents the regeneration ability on the vampire from kicking in. If it takes radiant damage during a turn, then on its next turn it doesn't get its regeneration. I think it gets 10 points back automatically, if I remember right. So if you hit it with radiant damage each round, it'll negate that on a round by round basis. And in this case, the group was just an almost complete tactical disadvantage, because you had that single file corridor. They couldn't really fight in the room because the room was dark. They couldn't get rid of the darkness. Uh, the dwarf had been charmed and was in the middle of everybody, and the dwarf was blocking movement through its square in that single file. There were just so many things working against them. Um, and they didn't really, they got split up. They didn't really have a cohesive plan. So, I mean, they just got rocked. Uh, and also, they're at 6th level, even though there's a lot of, it's a large party. And for the most part, they've overpowered, OP'd through stuff. Just the way this was laid out, they're at 6th level. So, higher level parties will probably not have as much as a challenge. Being prepared for a vampire would help. But yeah, you got to get rid of that darkness in the room and negate. That's a major, it just retreats to the darkness. And it can either be mist in there, it can be, you know, uh, solid, it can be a giant bat, it can move around. And, now, one of the new characters, the Warlock, there's a Warlock that came into the mix on this session because they had to replace characters. It has True Sight. So it has no problem with that room. But in general, that darkness is a big problem. Also, you don't have to summon the bats, the Children of the Night um, ability like I had the vampire do. So there's different things you can do, but it's definitely not unbeatable. But it is very tough. It's a very tough challenge. And the vampire's a challenge rating 13, so it's tough. Okay, and then finally, and thanks for commenting, Mike. Appreciate hearing from you. Finally, um, Scrage Grimclaw said, "Hi Shane, I watched all of your notes series, White Plume Mountains, and it's great so far. My party are 5 level 6 characters, and they just started this dungeon. I think we have 7 level 6 characters in my scenario when everybody shows up. I am thinking maybe I should nerf the vampire fight a bit." So the second question about this, because I'm not sure they have the resources to fight a CR13 monster in a magical darkened room. Or should I just give them the right tools? And maybe a scroll of dispel magic. Anyway, big fan. Keep doing a great job. Um, so here's my response. I said, with 5 level 6s, I would nerf the vampire. But remember, they stand to get whelm, which is a very famous legendary weapon. So don't make it too easy. Thanks for watching. So thanks, Scrage. Good to hear from you. That's all the viewer feedback here. Remember, yeah, it's a tough fight. But this is also a classic, famous dungeon that is supposed to be hard. So, I don't want to put them in a situation where there's no situation whatsoever where they could beat the vampire, but I don't mind them having a challenge. I mean, they're getting really legendary sentient weapons that are not only powerful in the game, but are famous in D&D. So they also get the bragging rights of saying that, we got Whelm, we got, Black Razor, we got Wave, uh, outside of the game. So, I wouldn't make it too easy. So anyway, that's, it for viewer feedback, and now we will get to the recap of what actually happened in the session. I'll take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback. All right, so on with the show. Let's see. So as a reminder, you had they had to have 4 new characters. 3 characters got killed. Let's see. Yeah, 3 characters were killed. That was Alsaj, the Drow Rogue, Uzumaki, the human fighter, and then Pyrite, the gnome wizard, stayed back to try to help and died. And then one player said, can I change characters?" And since we have this narrative device that they belong to an adventuring guild, and there was a relief party coming, because I had to replace those other characters, that I said, yeah, but normally I wouldn't just out of the blue say, yeah, you can just suddenly change characters. So we got the 4 new characters that came in. We got a Warlock. We got, let's see, another Rogue, I believe. Hold on a second, and I will get the list and tell you. Okay, here we go. So the player who was playing Scorch, the Tiefling Sorcerer, is now playing Arizima, the Rogue Svirfneblum. We have 2 Deep Gnomes, strangely enough. Uzumaki, the Human Fighter, is now Glemmer, the High Elf Wizard. Let's see. And then Alsaj, the Drow Rogue, is now Silver, a Svirfneblum Druid. Sure, why not? They were not. Yeah, okay, anyway. And then Pyrite, the gnome wizard, is now playing Elif, the moon elf warlock. And then we still have Kellandus, the half-elf bard, Elisor, the wood elf cleric, and Thorin, the dwarf fighter. So that's the party makeup at this point. So there you go. Again, we played it, and I'll get more into this here in a second, that a support / relief group had been dispatched from the Vanguard of the Eye out of Phandelver when they received a message when the original party left Waterdeep to go to the village to try White Plume Mountain. They had dispatched a message because they were supposed to be coming back from another adventure they were sent on, a mission, and instead they went to White Plume Mountain, and they had dispatched a message telling the guild what's going on. So the guild, because they had a few extra members sitting around, said, hey, go, you're sitting around doing nothing, go support, go see if they need help, see what's going on. So they're arriving about the same time that they're coming back after getting their butts kicked by the vampire. Some other stuff before I get into the blow-by-blow recap. One of the things that came up, we were talking about copying a spell from a scroll. What's the time and cost on that? So the rules on that, if you're curious or if you want a refresher, are first of all in the player's handbook, page 114. Copying a spell into your spell book. For each level of the spell, the process takes 2 hours and costs 50 gold pieces. So if it's a third level spell, it would take you 6 hours and cost 150 gold pieces. And then once you've spent the time and the money, you can propel the spell just like your other spells. Now, it has to be a level for which you have spell slots, and you have to have the time to decipher and copy it. Okay? But there's a twist that we didn't go into the other night. I'm not that worried about it, but it may come up in the future. On page 200 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, under Spell Scroll, it does say if the spell is on your class's spell list but of a higher level than you can normally cast, you must make an ability check using your spell casting ability to determine whether you cast it successfully. So this is casting a higher level scroll, not copying it. And the DC equals 10 plus the spell's level. On a failed check, the spell disappears from the scroll with no other effect. So just keep that in mind as a corollary, or not a corollary, but it is a somewhat related rule, that if you want to cast a spell from a scroll that's higher level than you, than you can normally cast, it requires, but it's in your, if you're a wizard and it's a wizard spell, but it's higher than you can normally cast, then you have to make an Arcana check to cast it. I had actually researched around on copying spells, and somebody brought that out as copying a spell, but I don't see that. Okay, and then also a wizard spell and a spell scroll can be copied, just as spells and spell books can be copied. When a spell is copied from a spell scroll, so not from a spell book, like somebody else's spell book, but from a scroll, the copier must succeed on Intelligence Arcana check with DC equal to 10 plus the spell's level. If the check succeeds, the spell is successfully copied. Whether the check succeeds or not, the spell is destroyed. So there's a little bit of information on either casting from or copying from spell scrolls. Also, crafting holy water time and cost. Strangely enough, they wanted to find some holy water after their encounter with the vampire. And there's 2 sessions in a row where they were looking around in the village for holy water. And I had said from the very beginning of the adventure that the chances of getting more than just very basic gear in this village are not a given. And that for 2 sessions in a row, they looked for holy water, and based on the chance I gave them, they could not find it. But they did have the cleric make some, and that is on page 152 of the player's handbook. And it says a cleric or paladin may create holy water by performing a special ritual. The ritual takes 1 hour to perform, Uses 25 gold pieces worth of powdered silver and requires the caster to expend a first level spell slot. So you can make holy water with a cleric or a paladin. So there you go. Now, to the actual uh, recap of what happened. So when they got back, they dragged their butts back down 3 party members and a 4th party member so shaken. I narratively, that person that wanted to change characters, I said, well, your Alsaj, the sorcerer, is so shaken that they just mentally don't want to go back in. Um, so they were, not doing well. And the village is like, hey, because the first time they came back, they're like conquering heroes. This time they're like, obviously things did not go well. So it's a little bit more somber. When they arrive back at the village at dusk, I just said it's at dusk for a nice narrative effect. They go to the village bar, tavern, the tap room, and has both the Vanguard of the Eye relief group, which is their replacement characters, but also a rival adventuring party. And they asked about the rival adventuring party, and I said that rival group is about as a generic as a fantasy party as you can get with classic. Or think of your classic, you know, humans, elves, halflings, dwarves, uh, fighter, rogue, wizard, cleric, uh, whatever. I mean, it's as generic as of a, and I just as a venturing party as you can get. It's definitely an adventuring party, um, and there was tension in the room because I kind of role played it like there'd already been some words exchanged between the Vanguard of the Eye relief group and this adventuring party. Uh, like the adventure party's like, we're going in, and Vanguard of the Eye's like, we're already in the middle of an expedition in there, and we have claim on this right now. So there was tension, and there's some eye daggers going back and forth, and the people in the tavern are kind of like, whoa. And the bard actually, the party's bard, uh, from the players, played a song to try to lighten the mood, and he did well enough that it lightened everybody's mood except for the 2 parties. Everybody else in the tavern, just the regular villagers, were like, and cheered up and all that stuff. So I added the rival party was really just to add a sense of urgency to getting back into the dungeon. I didn't want the party to feel like they could just hang out for days or weeks to get back in. We're just going to fully do this, and we're going to craft all this. I wanted to make it feel like you need to get back in there. Uh, I wanted to keep a sense of urgency and a little bit of threat in the adventure. Also, I'm setting up a possible end game that can involve other parties being interested in these weapons. So I'm setting that up as well. A final encounter or a final whatever for the adventure. Because as I've told the party and as I've shared during the video, even more than the party knows, it may not be a good thing that word is getting out. And there's people who have their eyes on this village. Maybe they've even paid villagers to, give sending stones or whatever to send messages about happenings or whatever. So there's eyes on this village and on White Plume Mountain because people know what's in there, and those weapons are coveted. So I'm kind of also setting that up a little bit. Not quite totally sure if I'm going to do that or not, but I'm setting it up a little bit. However, the players were not as bothered by the rival party as I assumed they would be. And they were just kind of like, and they were also kind of like, okay, we can have 2 adventuring parties in the dungeon at the same time, which surprised me. I was like, because I think if I were a player in the party, I'd be like, no, we're doing that dungeon. We've lost party members. We've put blood, sweat, and tears. They're not going in right now. We're in there. But that was not the response, which surprised me. But there it is. So they did a long rest. We role played a little bit the new party members coming in, and they decided, really because of the rival party, that they were going to go back, the next day. Because I made it clear that rival party wanted to go in there and did not respect, I guess, maybe an unwritten rule among adventurers that, we're already in there. We got dibs. And that other party was like, totally planning on going in there, and he even hinted around that, we're gonna leave early and hopefully follow you guys to find out how to get in, that kind of thing. So, so the next morning the party got ready and they decided to leave early. It finally dawned on them, maybe we don't want this adventuring party following us. I don't know, but they're like, okay, we'll get up early and leave before dawn. And they were kind of going down, and they saw this other rival adventuring party was just sitting in the tap room, fully geared up, obviously ready to go, just patiently sitting there. And they were like, ooh, so they snuck out a back way and left, assuming that rival party was going to try to follow them to the dungeon. So they said they wanted to do a stealth check on the way to the Wizard's Mouth, that cave, to get in, to try to minimize the ability to be followed. Because if you remember at the beginning of the adventure, it takes a while to find the Wizard's Mouth, even though there's this cave called the Wizard's Mouth, and it supposedly will lead you into the dungeon. You still have to find it, right? So and it took them several hours the first time. So they noticed the rival party was fully ready to go and patiently waiting. So they snuck out and they stealthed and they did their successful stealth check. And the druid also used this mold earth cantrip, which is from the Elemental Evil Player's Guide, which I've allowed. It's a free, like a PDF or whatever, that a companion thing that came out, I think when Princes of the Apocalypse adventure campaign came out, and it's just got some spells and some other stuff in it, and I allow that, so that I've allowed that into the game as fair game for spells and stuff. But there may be some races in there. I think race-wise, I've said if it's in the Player's Handbook or the SCAG's, Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, it's fair game. So anyway, the druid was also using mold earth cantrip a little bit to kind of cover their tracks. And we kind of joked around, we didn't make it in game, but joked around that because of the mold earth, there was this like perfect non-path that would have left a trail to follow, but I didn't play it that way. Okay, so they get back to the Wizard's Mouth, and again everything's reset. It's just like it was before. The slimy muck is covering the trap door. There was some discussion among the party on, do we try to hide the Wizard's Mouth? Do we block the entrance? Do we close the trap door? Do we close the door? Do we leave it open? Because of this other adventuring party. And I think they just decided to close the door when they went down, to just close the door behind them. There was some discussion of covering up using earth powers and this and that and the other, cover up the mouth of the cave. And between the steam that's in the cave and trying to escape, and also they were like, we may need to be beating a hasty retreat, they decided against that. So they go down the spiral staircase, they head down that first hallway, and as they're heading down that first hallway, and one of the things we talked about, they were like, we're stealthing, and I said, just keep in mind that there is a 1 foot layer of water, mucky, nasty, mildewy, yucky, foul. It's just gross in here. Every time they go back in, I reinforce how gross and unappealing it is inside. Sulfurous, just yucky inside, smelly, nasty, gritty inside White Plume Mountain. But there's also that foot of water, so you're sloshing through the water, so it makes it pretty hard to stealth. And as they're going down the hallway, they hear a tunk, kind of a tunk noise. It's like tunk kind of noise. And like, what is that? And they're looking down the hallway, and at the first corner, the first bend, they see something. They're not sure what it is. So they finally just walk up on it to see what it is. And it's actually one of the kayaks from the kayak room in that floating stream. And it's got the body of Pyrite, the gnome wizard, in the front seat. And then it has this sort of scarecrow thing made up of materials you would find inside this dungeon that's made up to look like Scorch, the tiefling, who has now left the party. And they're just in the kayak and they're tunking, there's slight wavy action in the water, and they're tuk-tunk against the corner. And I did this as sort of a creepy effect, but also sort of I wanted spooky, creepy atmosphere, this sense of somebody's messing with you. And it was also a message from me as the DM to the party that you might want to take this dungeon a little bit more seriously, because when they did the kayak, it was several sessions back, and they decided to ride the kayak across the frictionless floor and smash into the other wall just to see what would happen. Myself and commenters were like, wow, they're not really taking the dungeon very seriously. Like, they got hurt, they lost hit points. They're like, yeah, it was awesome. And, it was kind of funny, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, it's not really thematically, where's the sense of, accomplishment and adventure if you're just doing goofy stuff like that? So, so it was all of the above. It was, when it creeps, somebody's messing with you. You got the body of pyrite, which is found. And some of the players are like, ooh, this is really creepy. But one of the players, in fact, was part of the original kayak thing. That was like, oh, cool, when they smashed over there and they were stunned and hurt and a fight broke out and they couldn't be as useful as they normally could. They were like, oh, cool. When pyrite, it was the player that does pyrite, and they saw pyrite's body, they're like, oh, sweet, that's so cool. And I just, in a very flippant kind of manner, and I just got to rant a little bit as a DM. This really grinds my gears.
You know what really grinds my gears?
Kind of thing. I personally, unless the campaign is set up to be lighthearted, I personally don't like that it's all a big joke if I die or if we die attitude in the game. It makes me feel like, why am I bothering if it's no big deal? Why are we even going setting up all this stuff? It's just like, oh, it doesn't matter. We die. That's fun. Ha ha. It really kind of bothers me. And I know the player doesn't mean to bother me or whatever, but, there's been several times where they're in multiple, not just White Plume Mountain, but other stuff where their player possibly could die or dire things happen to their character. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah, I'm okay with that. I can die. I don't care. And I'm like, why are you, do you not care if there's a suspense? Are you not invested in your character? Or, it's just, I'm like, and it also, if you're trying to set up a dramatic moment for the entire party to go, ooh, and they're like, oh, cool, kind of bothers me. And and this is a good player. They're not always like that. They contribute to the group in many positive ways. But on this one thing, I'm like, and I don't know, should I bring it up? Is it worth bringing up? If I do bring it up, what's the best way to bring it up? Normally, I'm pretty straightforward. But in this case, it's a style. Not necessary. And I've never said, hey, you have to take all that, and I don't want to say you got to take this seriously and respect my effort. I don't want to be that way. So I'm trying to think about how if so, how to address it if I need to. But if you're a player and the DM's obviously trying to set up, a tragic moment or they'll go, ooh, cool. It's like, really? Why don't you go play Munchkin or something? Why are you playing a serious D&D game if that's your approach to horrible things that can or do happen to your character or somebody else's? Why are you going to do stuff that hurts the party because by playing around, you've left yourself stunned and down to half your hit points just to see what would happen in one of the most dangerous dungeons in D&D history? Anyway, all right. So enough of my rant there. We'll move on. They get back to the Sphinx. And of course, there's a new riddle. So I've made it so there's a new riddle every time they come back. And I'm just finding these online. Feel free to use mine or find your own if you need new riddles. Because that moon riddle, they only give you one riddle for the very first time you encounter the Sphinx. Now remember, you can fight past the Sphinx or you can do other stuff. But, if you want to solve the riddle, which my players seem to be enjoying the riddles, and I think it's cool to do the riddles. So this time, here was the Sphinx's riddle. The more you take, the more you leave behind. So the more you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? And they went back and forth and they talked to try to figure it out and da-da-da. And I wasn't, I was like, oh, I wonder if I've given them too hard. But they figured it out. I think they said steps, but the actual answer, the Sphinx is like, Yes, that's close enough. The actual answer is footsteps, and the Sphinx is a cat and very kind of above it all. But yeah, the more you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? Footsteps. So, and I went, and that actually used up I found 2 additional riddles, and I used all of those up, so I had to go find some more after the adventure to be prepared for next time. So at that point, they get past the Sphinx. They can go, northwest, straight north, or northeast, and they made a beeline right for northeast, right for the vampire again. Just no, no ifs, ands, or buts. They're going right back after that vampire. So I ruled that the green slime was back. Green slime's not hard to find in a dungeon. The green slime was back under the water. They were looking for it. They found it. The druid tried to use that mold earth cantrip, and I think he can only do 5 square feet or five, the 5 foot grid. And the green slime is just bigger than that. So he's trying to move the earth, the mud underneath the water around, and it just, is getting some of the green slime, but green slime was leaking back, and I just said it's basically not working. So again, they used 2 burning hand spells to get past, because I think there's like 20 foot worth of green slime long under the water, and I ruled that, the burning hands, because you're having to burn through a foot of water, isn't quite as effective range wise and all that. So they had to go they had to use 2 things of um, burning hands, just like last time. At that point, oh, and here's something that I didn't mention, and I should have, right after the viewer feedback. When I got there the other night, uh, a couple players, they didn't have their new characters ready. And they knew that they had to have their new characters ready. There was a week break where I didn't run, so another player ran a one-shot game in between. Um, so they had 2 weeks to do their characters, their replacement characters. We got there the other night, and there were a couple of people like, oh, they're trying to roll this and roll that and do everything. And they had 2 weeks to do this, and we get there, we're ready to go. We've only got 2.5 hours most on a game night because we're at a store. I usually get there pretty close to start time. I start setting up and getting us into it. And, there was a couple of kids, they just did not have their characters ready. They were frantically doing it. Was like watching somebody trying to do their homework at the last minute. And it bothered me. And I said as much. I said, you had 2 weeks to get your characters ready. I mean, they were still doing equipment, gold, spells, uh, everything. I mean, I think maybe they were like, they had their attributes and they were taking everything from there. And, I was like, wow. And so I just said, I expect that not to be the case in the future. I just straight up, I said, that this is not good because it's holding me up. It's holding the party up, and we have limited time. You had 2 weeks to do it. So, maybe I should have just ignored it and not said anything, but I said, what? I was like, seriously, your characters aren't done yet? Because they'd already told me ahead of time what type of characters they wanted to play and classes and this and that. So and they all had it ready to go. But anyway, this leads to my point. The reason I'm bringing that up is at that point, after the burning hands and this and that and the other, one of the players, and it's one of the players that is playing a wizard and didn't even have their spells picked out when we were getting going at the beginning of the session, said, hey, can I have a spell? And what he meant by that is like, can I get rid of this spell and instead have this different spell? And I think it was because they were thinking about, oh, what could be useful? And I went, no. I said, this is, it's one of the same players that was just quickly picking their spells. And I was like, no. I said, what you picked is what you have. There's no good reason for you just suddenly have a different spell. It's not my fault if A, you didn't prepare your spells in time, and B, you know what's in here. You've already been down this way. So, it's like loading a saved game with a different character, but you know what's coming. So no, I absolutely did not just say, oh, you can suddenly have another spell. And because I was irritated that they didn't even have, the characters ready. And there was no good it wasn't, hey, because of this and that and the other, would it make sense? There was like, oh, can I have the spell? I was like, no, you cannot have that spell. But anyway, they're kind of working their way to the vampire. Before you get to the Golem room, you can also go a little further east and go south, and it comes to room 4. And room 4 is very interesting, but they completely bypass it. They bypassed it twice, and they're trying to get to the vampire. So just in case they never make it there, I'm going to go over room 4 with you, just so it'll be covered in this series. It's an interesting room. It's not essential that a party goes to it, but it is an interesting room. And what it is it is it's a 30 by 30 room, uh, and it's the name of it is Glass Globes. So it says the door to this room appears normal on the way in. A large iron. Remember, my party did not go in here. I'm just covering this room to be comprehensive in case they never make it in here. The door to this room appears normal on the way in. A large iron-bound oak door, swollen by dampness and difficult to open. And that's all the doors in here, I think, require a DC 15 check. When the characters have entered the room, or as many of them are going in, the door will slam shut behind them. Bam! No tools, weapons, or magic available to the adventurers will open the door or prevent it from closing. The door is going to close, and they can't get it back open. Only the proper key inserted in the keyhole on the inside of the door will unlock it. In the room, suspended from the ceiling by unbreakable wires, are 9 silvered glass spheres. So they're just glass spheres that are silvered, like mirrored, kind of. Each about 2 feet in diameter. Unless otherwise noted, magically looking inside a sphere, such as with a clairvoyant spell or a ring of X-ray vision, will show that it contains some apparent treasure and a key. Each sphere holds a key, but only one of the keys opens the door. A good hard crack with a weapon will shatter any of the spheres. Each has AC 13 and 3 hit points. Dropping its contents, if not caught, into the muck below. So this room is one of the rooms that has the water and the foot of water and the mud underneath it. So the globes are 1 through 9. It says number them for your own reference. And then the party can randomly bust globes, and the globes have anything from shadows to a spell scroll of fear, 12,000 gold pieces, a false key, and an angry air elemental, a potion of flying, and a false key, worthless glass gems, and a false key, phony glass jewelry, a false key, and a gray ooze. The ooze fills the entire globe. It is invisible to magical inspection. You can't see it with that. Spell scroll of hold person and a false key. Gems worth 600 gold pieces and a false key. Basically, every sphere has a false key in it except one. Some of them have monsters, some of them treasure, some of them have basically costume jewelry treasure that's worthless. But sphere 8 has the actual key and a silver ring. So sphere 8 is the one that has the key to get back out. When the ring is released from the sphere, it speaks to the characters telepathically. So the ring falls out and starts talking to them. It says, stop before you put me on. I confer the following powers upon my wearer: invisibility, haste, immunity to charms, fly once per day, detect magic, and 1 wish. I also provide the benefits of protection and spell turning. The only drawback is that once a year I permanently eat a small part of your life. I must be warned before I can leave the room. Merely carrying me away is not possible. If ever I am removed from my wearer's finger, however, all my powers are lost. So you must decide right now who will wear me forever. Okay, and it goes on to say the situation is a basic loyalty and intelligence test. Now remember, back in the day, in a lot of ways, dungeon parties were much more mercenary and individual. They would turn on each other, backstab each other, steal from each other. Not always, but in a lot of cases. So it's almost creating a situation to lead to infighting among the party, or somebody revealing their true colors by wanting the ring. This situation is basic loyalty and intelligence test. Will the party members cut each other's throats over the ring? Will they be suspicious enough to simply leave it alone? If they take time to think about it, they'll likely realize that the ring must be a hoax. That's what the designer is assuming anyway. Someone who puts it on can cause it to exhibit any of the powers mentioned above, except for the wish spell, as long as it remains in the room. While it is located here, The ring enables the wearer to produce the indicated spell effects at will, except for fly, and it also acts as a ring of spell turning and ring of protection. Once the ring leaves the area, however, it has no abilities and can't talk. So that's room 4. It has all these globes hanging from some of them treasure, some of them don't. They all have false keys except one. The key in Sphere 8 is the only way you can get back out of the room. And some players are likely to balk at that. Like, I should be able to chop through the room. Man, it's old school D&D. They just say you ain't getting out of that room. The only way out of the room is with the key. And to do that, you got to start busting some globes. So it's a scenario that's been designed. So that's room 4. I just wanted to cover that in case my party never doesn't go in there, but yours does, and just to be comprehensive. So now they get to, I think it's room 5. I'll double check, but it's where the flesh golems were, and I ruled that the flesh golems were still dead, and the room had not reset. I did this both for time purposes. I didn't want to fight the golems again or any of that stuff. But also, last time they went through this room and one of the players blurted out the answer, and it caused me to have to change the answer and the golems to attack and all this stuff. I ruled that something had gone wrong. This room had become broken. And so I played that concept. So I just played into that, because I kind of basically said something about this room seems broken. The magic of the room or something seems off last time they came through, and so now they came through and the flesh golems are still just there dead. So I did that for time purposes really, but I kind of liked playing into that the room is broken thing. However, the turnstile was back. They pushed through it to get to to keep going to the room with the cavern and the boiling mud and the discs and the chains and all that. Now when they got to the chains and geysers room, there was a lot of discussion. What do we do? As if they had never encountered this room, really. Like, they seemed prepared for the geysers, but other than that, they're like... And I was really surprised by how unprepared and not ready for this room they were. I figured they'd be like, okay, here's our plan, we're getting across. But they were like, what do we do? And can I do this? And can I do that? And can I turn into a big spider and do this and that? And da-da-da? I mean, this is a pretty dangerous room. I figured they would have just had a plan. But they didn't. They asked a lot of questions about the room. So what they ended up doing, and I loved it, I allowed this 100% for the rule of cool, was what I call the Flying Snake Follies. And they were like, you can't call it the Follies, but I did because I thought it was funny. So anyway, the druid turned into a giant snake. I think he can turn into one of 3 different monsters or creatures or whatever. So he turned into a giant snake. The warlock cast flight onto the giant snake. Everyone climbed on and flew across to the other side. And for the rule of cool, I said, okay, we're doing that. I liked that idea. And I totally went with this due to the rule of cool. I didn't worry or quibble about weight limits or size of the platform or anything like how are you going to get the door open, and that platform's only so big, you got to get the door open, the snake's got to get through. I just allowed it for the rule of cool. I thought it was great. And I think it's okay to do sometimes that as a DM. They've come up with a cool idea. It's a cool visual. It's a cool moment. Just let them go for it. Now, they did try to figure out the timing of the geysers. Remember, one geyser's every 5 minutes, one's every 3 minutes. So it's this kind of constantly rotating, scenario or timing or whatever. It's not just every 2 minutes, or it ratchets, it changes slightly because one's at 5 minutes and one's at 3 minutes. So you're not, it's not completely even, I guess is what I'm saying. So they did intelligence checks to try to time the geysers, the alternating geysers, and the best roll was a 12. So I just gave them a 10% chance to get caught in a geyser while flying. I just ruled that. And I said, well, you kind of got it figured out, but you could be off a little bit. And of course, if the geysers erupt, everyone takes some damage. Flight's a concentration spell. If the warlock, can't cast flight or concentration, down they go. So it could have been fatal, but it wasn't, which was good. I loved the flying snake. I thought that was really cool. I have this like 80s cartoon, right? The flying snake. I want to get home today so I can watch the flying snake. And the flying snake with the little kids lined up and it flies and has adventures. But anyway, all right. So they go back down the corridor, remember, the closer you get to the vampire's lair, you get that sort of dry ice fog on the floor. You get creepy effects. It's laid out right in the monster manual with a vampire. The closer you get to a vampire's lair, it just gets creepy and sort of 40s Universal monster movie kind of effects. Uh, and they get to the door, that has the little holes in it, so the vampire can come out in a mist if it wants to. And they're talking to the vampire through the door, and in fact they're kind of talking smack to the vampire, and it's talking smack back. It's like, oh, welcome back to my hell. Did you miss your friends? Come join them. That kind of thing. Um, and so eventually they knocked on the door with Mage Hand. Um, there you go. Somebody asked earlier in the comments. I think it was Cody. No, I'm not sure if it was Cody, but about the Mage Hand. Uh, and they weren't doing it really to minimize. Well, I guess they were kind of trying to minimize the danger, but they were just kind of like knock, 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 and which I had no problem with. I didn't even think about that with the viewer comments on that until just now. And then the door creaked open. Darkness. Now the warlock has true sight out to like 120 feet, so they could see in there. They have no problem seeing in the room, and they just saw the coffin back there against the wall. I ruled that the coffin was back together. I didn't leave it smashed up. Although I still have to figure out, once they get to the treasure, how much of the treasure, if any, was destroyed by the fireballs. I think I'm going to rule some of it was. Not Wilm, obviously. And then at that point, the druid cast daylight into the room to dispel the darkness. They did not see the vampire, and that's where we ended. So that's where we will pick up next time. So I hope you enjoyed this recap of the most recent session of my party's adventures in White Plume Mountain. Despite, I do share my annoyance as a DM on occasion, but despite that, we had a lot of fun. This is a good group. We do have a lot of fun, but I just try to be honest in these videos when I'm annoyed as a DM and try to explain why.
You know what really grinds my gears?
Because I think it's helpful for other people to hear what goes on inside the mind of a DM, because we're human too. Um, and sometimes I get irritated, and later I go, I shouldn't have got irritated. And then sometimes I get irritated. I'm like, I think it was okay for me to be irritated and say something. And with it not being prepared on the characters when they had 2 weeks to do so, I think it was okay for me to say something. So, and I still stand by when the guy's like, hey, can I swap spells? No, there's no reason whatsoever. That's just lack of preparedness on your part. So anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time on the Shane Plays White Plume Mountain Notes series. Please leave a comment, maybe a thumbs up on the video. That helps me out tremendously. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We will catch you next time.